What is going on, alpha males? Welcome to Alpha Male Podcast, where we talk about what it means to be a man the right way, with God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, strong, dominant, in control. We don't apologize for that. I was thinking how I could serve you today. Sometimes you do deep philosophical episodes. Sometimes you just do fun kind of gear stuff. Today's going to be a fun gear stuff episode on tiny knives. Little knives, Lil knives, L-I-L if you want to be a cool kid. But that's what we're going to talk about today. Thought it'd be a fun episode, and I'm here to serve you guys, and not everything's got to be super serious. And I like small knives. They come in handy. You'll know if you listen, if you're a regular listener, and especially if you listen to Gunfighter Life. It's a whole other podcast I do on guns and gunfighting. I'm very much for you being armed. Jesus himself said in the Gospel of Luke, "Let he who has no sword sell his cloak and buy one." Most of these knives won't be a formidable fighting weapon. They might be a force multiplier if you had to use one. I would encourage you to carry a gun and a knife that is good for fighting and defense. However, there's times when either you can't, or it's not just conducive to what you're doing, or you just want a small knife in addition to. For instance, I like carrying a smaller blade as a sacrificial blade for all the dirty work that I don't want to ruin my good defensive blade for in case I need it for defense. I carry a handgun, I carry a good fixed blade knife of decent size, but I'll often carry a smaller blade for utility. Now that's what we're going to talk about today, smaller knives. Now for smaller, that's kind of a weird criteria, but I'm going to go with really lightweight. So they may not be that small in size, but they're very lightweight and they carry very small, like so light that you could carry them running in a pair of silkies. Or so small that let's say the blade would fit in the palm of your hand. I'm going to say less than 3 inches. And a lot of places, legality dictates that you have to have a blade under 3 inches. So for that, there may be many reasons why you want a small blade. If a small blade is what you have for defense, and if you're living in a place where you can't carry a knife over 3 inches, it's likely you're probably not going to be able to carry a handgun. Although I don't know that for sure. Knife laws are as convoluted and hard to understand as fish and game laws and different gun laws in different states here in the U.S. And I know we have listeners from all around the world. Anyway, that's enough caveats. Let's get into some small knives, small blades. First couple I'm going to talk about are small multi-tools. There is the Leatherman. The Leatherman Micra is a great small multi-tool. When I was managing a firearms and training company, I didn't have to, but I would often go out and volunteer to be the RO to give my ROs a break because it's kind of daunting if you've never been a range safety officer for long periods of time. You're out there to pay attention, and it's just honestly hard to pay attention for long periods of time. So to give the guys a break from time to time, I would go out there and be a range officer. It was nice to have a little multi-tool on my keychain. I carried a lot of keys in that business to unlock different things. We're also like a class 3, so we had all kinds of machine guns and suppressors and stuff like that. So we had a lot of keys. On that key ring, I would have a Leatherman Micra, and it came in really handy as part of my EDC during that job. It had a lot of small tools on it. It had stuff that was great for fixing common malfunctions, like, when you get a piece of stuck brass in an AR, which is not uncommon. Failure to extract, things like that can be quite handy. And I used it a lot for lots of different things. And again, a sacrificial blade. So in that job, you might imagine I did a lot of inventory stuff and shipping stuff and receiving stuff and cutting open a lot of cardboards and boxes and tape. And I don't want my nice fixed blade knife for that. I want to keep that sharp for things that I need a really sharp knife for. So in that case, I would use this as a sacrificial blade. And I would sharpen it from time to time. But if it got a little dull, I wasn't going to cry about it. So I really like it. My wife also has one. She really likes hers. I got one for her. And Gerber also makes one called the Gerber Dime. Now, I thought for a time that it was called the Gerber Dime because it was small, and dimes are small. But I guess I heard that it was maybe called the Gerber Dime because it has 10 tools on it. So 10, dime, kind of makes sense. Either one of those, are really good small multi-tools. The Leatherman Micra, again, is the one that I have the most experience with, and I really like it. The thing that I don't really like is that the big tool when you unfold it is scissors. I don't use the scissors that much. I would rather see that be a bigger blade. So it had like two decent sized blades and it opened up like a butterfly knife. That would be pretty cool. And it's the whole point is it's probably too thin to use pliers, but maybe something else that I would use more than the scissors. But other than that, it's a really good knife. Had a lot of really handy stuff on there. The next one I'm going to talk about is like ye olde pocket knife. There's some ones that are around that have been around, but the most common, I think, at least here in America, are the old timers. Those are really good knives. I also have some little ones of those, or I should say my wife does. I got them for her, and she really likes it when I get her all kinds of knives.
Should we feed him now?
She never has enough knives. She said that's a joke. We're on a road trip right now. If you can't tell, this is the mobile studio. I buy her way more knives than she probably ever needs. But these are really handy little knives. The little old-timer knives, they're kind of the ones you would think of as the older generations having in their pocket. I don't like the fact that they don't lock open. And for me, that's kind of a no-go. Little story when I was in the Marines doing tactical, super cool guy stuff. We were also repairing range targets, being like a range crew. And we were out there poking holes in targets and lashing them together with some old commo wire to make some kind of tactical range. And one of the other Marines handed me his little old-timer knife. Well, I just assumed it locked open because most knives do. And I went to shove down hard to poke a hole through this pretty robust plastic green target, the old Ivan targets, if you know what those are. And I shoved down on that thing and it folded over right on my fingers, and I had to get stitches. So I'm not a big fan of not locking knives. Unless you live in a jurisdiction that mandates that you have to carry a less safe knife, I would not recommend them for any kind of hard use. But again, if you just want a small, handy sacrificial blade, I think they're fine for that. A non-locking blade for just opening packages and boxes, which is what a lot of people do. And if you just want it for that, for a small sacrificial blade, getting grease out of your fingernails, stuff like that, then they're fine for that, those little small old-timer knives. Also, the Victorinox. Now, they make really big knives, but I think probably their main one is the old Victorinox Classic. They probably sell more of those than many other knives, and they're great. Actually, that was part of my EDC for a long time. They're a great little thing. They come with a small sacrificial blade. They come with a small file and a screwdriver, which comes in handy for anything screwdrivers come in handy for. It's really well thought out. It fits most screws, both Phillips and flathead. It had a little pair of scissors, which again, I'm not the biggest fan of the scissors. But in the handles, it also came with tweezers and a toothpick. The toothpick I kind of cut and made a Tonto toothpick to poke holes and stuff, like if I had to repair stuff. Not big on it for a toothpick, but it's good for that. And also the tweezers. The tweezers are super handy, like for pulling cactus spurs and stuff like that out, or getting a splinter out of myself or my dog. They're really handy. Also, I'm going to put this one in here because it doesn't really fit anywhere else. And that is the Gerber EAB or something like it, the Exchange Blade. It's a really small contraption that kind of quasi duplicates a pocket knife, but it holds the regular razor blades, like the utility cut razor blades, which is really handy. Again, if you just want it as a sacrificial blade, and especially if you're not the kind of guy that likes to sharpen stuff, a big pack of razor blades is not that expensive. You get a big pack of razor blades, you use one, you turn it around when it gets dull, and after a while you throw it away and in a safe place in some kind of container like an old vitamin bottle or something where it's not going to cut somebody, and you always have a pretty sharp knife on you. Again, especially for a smaller sacrificial blade where you're cutting a lot of stuff that's going to dull a knife like cardboard or things like that. Those Gerber EABs, and there are other ones, but that's probably the most common one that I'm aware of. So that's a really cool knife as well. The next knife I'm going to talk about is another one that I gave my wife, but she really likes it and runs with it all the time. Why are you laughing? Why you got so many knives? It is her Cold Steel Urban Pal. It's her little push dagger. And I put it on a piece of micro cord for a neck knife, and she uses it a lot when she runs. That's her running knife. And for the way she runs and how much she runs, she really likes it. It is a push dagger. If you're not familiar with a push dagger, it's meant to be held in between the fingers and you punch with it. and it punches well above its weight class for the size of knife that it is and how light and handy it is. It's a formidable weapon. It's not the best weapon. It's not the best fighting knife. I'm not saying that. They make bigger ones than the Urban Pal. But if you're talking about a small little knife, if you wanted to get one for a lady in your life, a small, unobtrusive, easy to move around with neck knife that you can just grab and throw punches with. You don't really need any other kind of special training with it. They're really handy for that, and I'm a big fan of the bigger push daggers. I used to run one of those in my war belt when I was doing tactical. When I was the commander of a tactical team, stop active shooters, I would run one in my war belt for that reason. It's easy to just grab and go, to make time, make space to get to my firearm. So that Cold Steel Urban Pal, they're really good little knives. It's a really good little. There's also another. Actually, there's a few. CRKT makes some really small fixed blade knives. A lot of theirs I don't like because they have finger grooves, and I honestly can't stand finger grooves on knives. It's almost a deal breaker for me. Because, especially if it's maybe going to be used for defense ever, I want to be able to grab it in different orientations. And that finger groove the finger grooves, depending on how pronounced they are, really hinders that. I don't like finger grooves. I don't know why they put them on so many knives. And a lot of times, unless you're like the model person whose hands that was designed for, it kind of dictates how you have to hold that knife. And if it's not the natural way that you would hold that knife, it's kind of a pain. One of the ones they have made in the past is the Doug Ritter, and it's a tiny little knife. I think it came in like a Altoids tin. That gives you an idea. It's a small little knife. The Doug Ritter, I believe it's the RSK Mark V. I just looked it up for you guys. It's a small knife, but it really kind of cuts above its size. It's got a 1.75 inch blade, which is really small, and the handle's really small. And it comes with like a little piece of 550 cord or something like 550 cord tied around the handle, and you grab that so you get a finger or two on the handle, and then you hold the cord in your hand to stop it from moving around. It's really more effective than you would think when you just look at how small that knife is. Not a great defensive tool. I mean, it's maybe a force multiplier, but not by much. But it's a really good small utility blade. So if you want a small, good sacrificial cutting knife that is a lot more robust than, let's say, one of those razor blades that we talked about, it could be a great little small utility blade. It's got a good, decent size. It's probably not the best super steel, but it's a decent steel. And when I was doing like the neck knife thing, if you guys haven't listened to that episode, I did a whole time period where I carried a neck knife. It's not what I normally do, but I was doing it to kind of try different ones out for you guys, for the audience. And I carried this one as a neck knife, and it was so small I'd often forget that I was wearing it. I mean, it's so small and so light on a piece of micro cord that honestly you just kind of forget, even working out, that you're wearing it, unless you do some kind of exercise where you're kind of inverted and the knife falls out of your shirt. But other than that, unless you're doing stuff like that, doing handstands, you're probably going to forget that it's there. So if you want something like that, where you want a knife, but maybe you're not carrying the shorts with pockets or something like that, you're going swimming, whatever the case is, and you still want a knife, it's a good little handy option. And CRKT does make some other smaller, fairly affordable fixed blades. I'm not going to get into all the ones that they make, but they make some good ones. Another one, if you want to talk about little folding knives, the original one is still a small knife, and that is the Cold Steel Tough Light. They're kind of a cool design. They have a flat, straight blade, but they have a curved top, kind of like not really a Warncliffe and kind of a sheep's foot. I don't even know what you would call it, kind of a hybrid between the two. But it's just got a straight blade and a curved down front. A really good design, both for utility and if you had to use it for defense. It gives you a lot of leverage on the tip of that knife. The Cold Steel Tough Light, the original one is fairly small. So that's a great small knife. But they even make one smaller, the Mini Tough Light. And that's a great, even smaller knife. If you talk about a great little small utility knife, maybe you want something in your pocket that you're going to forget that you have. And you just want a good, small, workable utility blade. Those Tough Lights, and as the name implies, they're very lightweight. And they're they're affordable. They're not a crazy expensive knife. So if you're the kind of person that loses knives quite frequently, maybe a good choice. Cold Steel, talking about them, they make another really small knife. It's not as minimalist as that CRKT Doug Ritter I talked about, but it's probably about the same size. It has a rubber handle and a Kydex sheath, Kydex is a brand name, but it's that style of sheath. And it's the Super Edge. It's a really cool small knife. I've had one for a long time. It's, at least the one that I'm aware of, is a full serrated edge. This would not be as good, in my opinion, day to day if you're using it as a sacrificial blade, because serrations are just way harder to sharpen. But what it is really good for is cutting through thick straps and stuff like that with a really small knife. So one thing that I had mine for was attaching to my pack, my hiking bag, my bug out bag. So if I had to cut it away quickly, I have that small knife that's not going to get in the way, just attached near my shoulders where I can grab it quickly and I can cut something off of me really quick. Because those serrations are really wicked for cutting through pretty beefy, substantial stuff. And it's a small enough thing and it's not going to get in the way. It's not going to swing all around. It's not going to stop me from shouldering a weapon or something like that. So they have their applications. If you want a really good serrated small knife for a similar application, and you're not going to use it all the time, so you're not really worried about sharpening it, it's not going to be your day-to-day EDC, but you want a really small knife for something like that, it's a good little option. That's a Cold Steel Super Edge. A Cold Steel, they make a lot of other really small minimalist knives, but most of the ones I saw that are this size have finger grooves, or one really big finger groove, and again, I don't like that. I don't like the finger groove. If I want to grab it in a reverse grip or out the back of my hand for like a hammer fist, I don't like that. I don't like the finger groove. So if that doesn't bother you, then they make a lot of other little cool models like that. Another one that they make, and I'm not like shilling for Cold Steel, they don't give me any money, any kickbacks. They just make a lot of really good affordable knives. I have their bird and trout knife. That's another one I carried as a neck knife, is that neck knife experiment, but it's also a really good small knife. As its name implies, good for bird and trout or any kind of small game processing. It's got a really long but very minimalist handle and a very small but very usable, good style blade. It's very long, but depending on your application, it could be a very minimalist carry. If you wanted to carry it as a neck knife, if the length doesn't bother you, and if it's, vertical in between your pectoral muscles, you probably aren't going to notice it. It's a good little knife. It's very utilitarian, and if you grab it towards the back, it has a ring through it, so you could put your thumb in it, and you could, let's say, shove it into something far further than the blade. So even though the blade might only be less than 2 inches long, you could shove it into something much farther than that. So take that and apply it however you want. But a good, small, sharp knife, at least the blade is very small. The handle is very long, but very minimalist. It's basically just kind of a square steel post. It's really, really small, very minimalistic, a bird and trout knife. If you want a very small utilitarian knife like that, some people wear these as a neck knife. I don't think that I would, but it's the Mora Eldris. And if you're familiar with Mora knives, they make really good knives for the money. They make very, very sharp. They're kind of known for their Scandi grind, kind of bushcrafty knives. Mora nib, if you're a cool kid and you want to say it the way the Swedes do. I think that's how they say it. I'm not Swedish. But Mora nib. And they make one, the Eldris. It's a really small knife. It kind of reminds me of a pineapple. It's not nearly that big, but it's that kind of shape. I also got one of these for my wife. She was looking at doing a very long hike, the Arizona Trail, some 800 miles, and I wanted to get her a good, small, lightweight utility knife. And I got her this Mora Eldris. It's a good small knife. If you want a good knife that you can still grab and do a lot of hard work with, if you're the kind of person that likes doing, woodworking, whittling, bushcrafty stuff like that a lot, making traps, making deadfalls, or anything you want a fairly sharp and easy to sharpen Scandi grind kind of blade for, they're a really good small option. Again, I don't think I would carry it as a neck knife, but if you wanted to, you certainly could. It's a very, very small and very utilitarian knife. And I think with that, we're going to step up to a little bit bigger knives, but still what I will call a small knife. You'll know if you've listened for any length of time that I'm a big fan of the Buck 110 Slim. I denote the Slim. The Buck 110 is a good classic heirloom quality knife. If you want to get one for a son or a nephew to like have for generations and pass down, they're a great knife. They're not as good in my opinion for EDC, everyday carry, as the modernized version, the Buck 110 Slim. They're better in a lot of ways. They're slimmer, as the name denotes. They have a good pocket clip, so you can just carry them in a pocket, but not drop down in your pocket where it gets all discombobulated when you're running or something. And you don't have to carry it on a little pouch, which I'm not a big fan of. You just carry it in your pocket with the pocket clip. It also has a thumb stud on it, which is really nice for one-handed opening. So it's better in a lot of ways. Well, they make a smaller version. They make the Buck 112 Slim. It's got a much smaller blade. It's still got a good usable handle if you're in one of those jurisdictions where the magistrate dictates that you carry a knife smaller than 3 inches. It may be a good option. It's still a good handle. Very, very nice in the hand, and it does not have finger grooves, which I really like and appreciate. And it's a really good both size and shape of blade, especially for a really cool dual-purpose blade for defense, for butchering game and things like that. I really like a clip point blade, much like a K-bar, which was, as I believe, as history goes, an adaptation of a big hunting knife. I like that clip point blade. I like it because I can put my finger up on it and reach up inside an animal and cut away the heart, the liver, the lungs, all that stuff. And I like using it like a sharp finger, like putting my finger on it and holding it there so I can just kind of point with my finger and cut whatever I'm pointing at when I'm processing a deer, a sheep, whatever I'm doing. It's really good for that clip point design. If you want a smaller version of that, again, the Buck 112 Slim, a really, really good knife. They make just a basic model, which is still really good. Buck does a really good job of heat treating their fairly, let's say, vanilla steels and making them really good because they have a really good heat treat. You can get really good premium steels in the Buck 112, I believe, because you can in the 110, so I assume you can also in the 112. They're really, really good knives. Wouldn't be my go-to. I prefer carrying a fixed blade, but it wouldn't be a bad choice, and especially if I was going somewhere where I had to have a folding pocket knife, that's what was legal, under 3 inches, it would be a really good choice. That Buck 112 Slim, a great knife. Now, if you want to spend a little bit more, you want a really, really good knife, again, you could get the premium quality Buck 112, or you could get a Benchmade. The one Benchmade knife that I own is a Benchmade Bailout. If you're talking about a really good lightweight, again, it's not a small knife, but I said in the beginning, a really lightweight knife that you could put in your pocket and probably forget that you have. That you can literally tuck into a pair of silkies and go running, which I have done many times with this knife. Really, really good option. The Benchmade Bailout. It's a Tonto blade. Again, if you want a really lightweight option, but you also want a good defensive option, the Bailout is a really good option. They're very, very lightweight, very minimalistic, very robust. Mine's a 3V steel, which is a really good quality powder metallurgy steel. You know, what you'd often call a super steel. Really, really good, sharp knife. And if you want a more dual purpose, like good all-around knife, the Benchmade Bug Out. And you would think I'd have one of these, but I don't and never have. They make the Bailout, and they make the smaller version, the Bug Out. The Bug Out is the more dual purpose. It's got a more traditional swept back blade, not a Tonto. So not as good for defense, but still pretty good. It's a good quality knife. It's a really good size. Like, it's a good all-around pocket knife, a good all-around EDC knife. They come in really good steel. But just like the Bailout, they're super lightweight. And they also make a smaller one. I don't know if they just call it the Mini, but they make a smaller version of the Bug Out, which is also a really good knife. And it's a really popular Benchmade knife. I don't know if it's their most popular. The Griptilium may be, but the The Bug Out is a really popular knife, so it comes in all kinds of different colors, and they even make aftermarket scales and stuff for it. Most of those are going to be heavier, so you're kind of getting rid of the lightweightness of the knife, which I don't really see why I wouldn't do that, I don't think. But the Benchmade Bug Out is a really good lightweight knife that carries like a really small knife, but it's a decent size knife. You could do pretty much anything with it. You could, I'm sure, butcher an entire deer with it. But it's super lightweight. If you want something a little bit like that, but less expensive, but still fairly lightweight, and you don't want to go the Buck 112 for whatever reason, there is the K-Bar Dozier. And that's a really good knife. They make the basic model, which I don't know what kind of steel that is, but their basic model of steel, the K-Bar Dozier. They also make it in D2. And if you don't know, D2 is a good, not super steel, but it's a tool steel. So it's a good mix of being fairly stain resistant and holding an edge really well. The one downside is it's fairly hard to sharpen, but it's a better steel, I think, for a lot of applications. But the K-Bar Dozier, it's a good knife. It's way less expensive than a Benchmade Bug Out or a Bailout. So again, if you're the kind of person that loses knives, misplaces knives, things like that, gives knives away, it's a really good all-around knife. I don't think it's as good like a dual-purpose knife as the Buck 110 or the Buck 112. I don't think it would be as good a defensive option even as the Buck 112. I just don't like the handle as much. I think if I was really shoving it into something, it might slip back on my hand. It doesn't have as good a handle design in my opinion, but it's really comfortable. And if you're talking just a good utility knife, it's a really good knife, and it's really lightweight, and it doesn't cost an arm and a leg. You know, you're talking way, way less. I don't like to get into prices with inflation the way that it is, and I don't want to do the Cougarand analogy because honestly, I just woke up early and went for a run, and I wanted to do this while I was still on that kind of runner's high. But my brain doesn't function as well in the morning. I don't feel like doing fractions of Cougarands in my head, but it's much less expensive than the Benchmade Bug Out or Bailout. And that K-Bar Dozier, it's a good all-around size. And some people don't like a clip point blade. So if you prefer this one to the Buck, it's a really good option.
Yeah. I ain't got anything wrong with that.
Now we get to my wife's favorite knife that she kind of commandeered from me. And this is the Havalon. It is actually one of my go-to knives when I was a professional big game hunter and guide, when I did a lot of meat processing. I mean, I might butcher elk and bison and deer on a big hunt. And not that I can't sharpen a knife or that I don't like sharpening a knife, but when I'm doing that much quantity of meat and hide processing, and I want a really sharp knife all the time, these are awesome. There's two companies that make a similar knife. There's probably more, but the two big ones, Outdoor Edge and Havalon. I think Havalon is the better quality. If you want a really sharp, I'm talking like surgical, scalpel sharp, replaceable blade, the Havalon, I think it's the Piranha, they're phenomenal knives. I had my first one years and years ago. I took it on a bear hunt and lost it somewhere in the wilderness of the Sierra Nevadas. I bought another one. I used it as a professional big game hunter and guide. They're super lightweight. They're not a big blade, but they're crazy sharp. I mean, be careful when you use them sharp. I mean, obviously, be safe and careful with every knife, but really be careful with these. They cut like you're not even doing anything. And my wife likes it because they're disposable blades, so I gave that to her mostly to use as her do-anything knife, because my wife has a habit of just cutting really obnoxious stuff with really good knives and kind of destroying them. She doesn't really understand the sacrificial blade concept. So in order to give us a happier marriage, I long-term loaned her this Avalon so that she could cut anything with it. And when it gets really dull, I will just resharpen it. And when it gets really tore up, I'll just replace the blade. And, you know, it keeps us both happier. But the Havalon Piranha is a really good knife, and I'm not going to endorse anyone specifically, but places like Etsy or eBay, these blades are so good, and they come in like multi-packs. There are companies that make like really cool I don't know what you would call it, like EDC chic, if you want to call that a style, like G10 and different style handles that take these same blades. So if you want something a little bit upscale, you want like a gentleman's surgical scalpel, if that appeals to you for an EDC option, there's companies that make these, like minimalist, like small mom and pop companies like Etsy style things. So if you look those up, that's a really cool option as well. And then on the Outdoor Edge, I don't like the Outdoor Edge as much, but I will give them credit. They have a safer, exchangeable design. The Havalon, you really got to be careful changing the blades. I have cut myself changing the blades before, especially when I'm tired and I've been processing a lot of wild game and stuff like that, because it's kind of a trick to getting the blade out. The Outdoor Edge is easier in that way, but they make a small version as well that has a smaller exchangeable blade. And unlike the Gerber EAB, where it's a regular razor blade, which is not great for like processing game and doing a lot of other kind of cutting, the Outdoor Edge makes I believe it's called the EDC. It's their everyday carry knife, and it's an exchangeable blade knife that's super sharp. And it's not the most robust blade, but again, if you want a super, really, really almost surgical sharp. I don't think they're as sharp or as slicey as the Havalon, but really, really sharp. If you want a razor blade sharp knife that you can just exchange, if you're not the kind of guy that wants to sharpen a blade, or you want to wait and just keep the old blades and then all at once, like once every couple of months, sharpen the blades on a really good sharpener and get them razor sharp again, because you can resharpen them. That might be a really good really good option. Either that Havalon Piranha or the Outdoor Edge EDC. They're both really good options, and I can tell that I'm starting to come off that runner's high, and it's early, and I'm not a morning person. So I'm going to call this wrapping it up for this episode. Your tactical tip of the day. If you want a happy wife, buy her lots of knives. That they love that. They love that. That's exactly what they want for an anniversary and a birthday. Yeah. And whatever. Yeah, if you don't know, man, knives. Women love knives. That's your tactical tip of the day. Also, making them drive so you can podcast. It's a great marital bliss right there. So, anyway, just a fun tactical tip for you guys. If you don't know, that's a little bit of tongue-in-cheek. Tactical verse of the day, I said it at the beginning, but it's a good one. From the Gospel of Luke, let he who has no sword sell his cloak and buy one. If you wanted to put that into modern vernacular, I've seen it or heard it or both. Sell your Xbox and buy a Glock. Like, when you're a child, you think like a child. When you're a man, you put away childish things. Some kind of defensive tool, some kind of utility tool. A knife is a good dual option. But Jesus said sword. He didn't say knife. They had knives. There was a different word for knife. He said sword. A sword is a defensive thing. You could cut bread with a sword, but that's not really what it's for. A sword is for defense. So think about that. Let he who has no sword sell his cloak and buy one. With that, thanks for listening and have a blessed day.